This episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k is sponsored by Frontline Gaming and LVO 2026. Get tickets to this year's LVO and the links in the video description. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the past week of competitive play and talk about what is winning. This episode is for the weekend of April 25th and 26th, 2026. And I was away this weekend at the ATC North Carolina, providing some coverage for their 5-player team event. If you're interested in Teams 40k, we had some great teams on there and some incredible games and very close finishes over the course of the weekend, so you can check out my coverage. But that also means that I am away in a hotel traveling back right now as I'm recording this video, so I hope that my audio is not too bad. But this weekend still saw some impressive results for Warhammer 40k, including the Warhammer Open Maastricht being held over in the Netherlands, which was won by Tyranids. We also had some cool results from things like Ulltramarines, the very non-standard detachment. However, the real headliner this weekend is the presence of the new Defiler datasheet that was released a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, this is available for multiple factions, and it is incredibly powerful in the majority of those factions. So as we look at our metagame breakdown here, we can see that Chaos Space Marines, Emperor's Children, and Thousand Sons, all three of which are factions that have access to the new Defiler variants, all did incredibly well. Chaos Space Marines with all but one of their undefeated lists running a Defiler build, taking down OzCon, the Canarian Open, Fantasia Fanatic, Cross Swords War at the Westerward, and Squig City Casino Royale, where they took the top 1 and 2 placements, both of those lists, using Defilers. Now, one thing I want to get better at doing in this series is talking both about interesting lists that I find curious and lists that are a little bit more representational of the metagame. So what I'm going to do is talk about the one list that did not use Defilers, because I think that is honestly a little bit more interesting, but then hop on over to one of the more standard builds that is running Defilers that did well this weekend. But that isn't the only faction using Defilers. We also saw Emperor's Children. I believe every single Emperor's Children undefeated result used multiple Defilers in their list as well. That took down the Derg Doom 6, OzCon with another undefeated result, as well as the Shkovda Battle Forge. Thousand Sons, also with access to Defilers, took down the Southwest Swordwind GT. However, they also won the Team Sigil GT, that one not using Defilers. That one was a more standard build. It is clear, in my opinion, that the Defiler datasheet is ludicrously pushed, and I think we can see the results of that here. Now, besides that, the only other faction to have multiple undefeated results was Necrons, the only faction that did not have access to the Defiler datasheet. They took down the Lyon Iberian Open, as well as the Prestige Wargaming GT number 3. We also saw some Space Marine representation at the Lyon Iberian Open with a very interesting list using Ceramite Sentinels, which is really cool. We also saw Deathwatch with one of the undefeated results at Fantasia Fanatic. Adeptus Custodes were also undefeated at Squig City Casino Royale, losing out to those two Chaos Space Marine lists on tiebreakers. The big headliner of the weekend, the Warhammer Open Maastricht, the largest singles event of the weekend, was won by Tyranids, which is neat. And I heard the finals game was absolutely nuts. That was streamed over on the Warhammer channel official. We also saw Tau Empire taking down the Derg Doom 6. Drukhari taking down the double-decker Decimation. Try saying that 5 times fast. Holy crap. And Orcs also undefeated at the Southwest Swordwind GT. So with that, we'll hop over and talk about these lists just after a word from our sponsor.
The time is now to get tickets to the Las Vegas Open 2026, one of the largest and most prestigious competitive tabletop gaming experiences of all time, and one that has a long and storied history of being a tentpole for competitive scenes the world over. From Warhammer 40k, Age of Sigmar, Old World, War Machine, dozens and dozens of games, all available at LVO. It's such a tentpole, it gives me a tentpole, if you know what I mean. But in any case, LVO 2026 is going down October 1st through 4th. Tickets have just gone on sale starting April 22nd, so get those purchases in now before you lose spots in the events that you want to participate in. Check them out at events.frontlinegaming.org or more specifically at lasvegasopen.net, either on screen here or in the links in the video description. If you don't, they will sell out and will make fun of you for not pre-ordering. It's on you. I don't make the rules. Huge thanks to Frontline Gaming and the Las Vegas Open for sponsoring this video. Get your tickets today.
Now, starting off with our headliners, Chaos Space Marines, we're going to talk about the Cross Swords War at the Westward 10. This was a 40-player event, went to a single undefeated, and used the UKTC terrain set. And I want to talk about this list in particular because it was the only Chaos Space Marine list not to use Defilers. It was a little bit more of a standard build. That said, it was playing in Renegade Raiders, which I have been seeing a big spike in play rate of late. A lot of people are picking this up both with and without the new Demon engines. Now, in this case, we were running Cypher, Fabius Bile, Huron Blackheart, as well as Vashtor the Archifane, a pair of Chaos Cultist mobs, in addition to 3 Chaos Rhinos to deliver some of this infantry, 25 total Chosen, a unit of 5, as well as 2 units of 10, the Masters of the Maelstrom, 2 Forge Fiends, and a Red Corsair Raider squad. Now, those Chosen can attach in with Fabius Bile in a 10-man, as well as Huron Blackheart in one of the units, potentially dual attaching with the Masters of the Maelstrom. Oftentimes, what's been being used in this detachment or in these builds is the Masters of the Maelstrom dual attaching with the 5-man, because that builds you a 10-man or 11-man squad, I believe, that can then go into one of the Chaos Rhinos. You then have a second Chosen unit that has no attached characters that you can use a little bit more freely to trade for objectives as more of a disruption unit, and then you obviously have Fabius Bile's unit that slaps absolutely just super incredibly hard. You have then the Corsair Raiders that can act as an additional disruption piece, so you have these basically 3 or 4 ranks of infantry squads that can push on your opponent's objectives, create space for your the remainder of your army, and start to beat down your opponent. All the while, you have Vashtor the Archifane buffing up a pair of Forge Fiends into the back. That includes 2 of them with ectoplasma cannons that can obviously get that +1 to strength, from Vashtor, which oftentimes ends up being +1 to wound against a lot of defensive profiles. And those guys can provide your backline shooting. All the while, they can protect Vashtor. Little cheeky thing you could do with that guy is because he deep strikes, you can actually just deep strike him next to the Forge Fiends to give him lone operative and then buff their guns. Then he can push forward on the subsequent turn, and your opponent isn't going to be able to interact with him when he rapid ingresses onto the battlefield. So a little bit of sneaky technology there, but it is cool to see a more classic build of Chaos Space Marines doing well. Now, with that, we're going to move on over to the Swedish event, the Fantasia Fanatic. This was a 99-player event, but only ran 5 rounds. We've been seeing a couple of these. I think this is sort of a classic one. This is obviously Fantasia Fanatic has been kind of a staple of the Swedish scene for a really long time. However, we've been seeing more and more events running 5 rounds due to time constraints, but with larger and larger player populations. So the fact that we are seeing more of these events with large undefeated player pools is kind of unsurprising, and there's not really a way to get around that realistically without running longer events, which obviously is a lot more logistically difficult. So I doubt that we see that. And I think that as the game becomes more popular and the competitive community grows and grows, we're probably going to see more of these events that have lots of undefeated players. Now, in this case, we're going to talk about Rasmus Haglund's list, who took 2nd place in the event at a 5-0 record. In this case, he was playing Pact-Bound Zealots. Now, this is basically the staple for Defiler play in the current format. If you are playing lots of Defilers and lots of shooting units, more often than not, you're going to be playing in Pact-Bound Zealots. Now, the reason for that is that you can protect them with Festering Miasma to make them difficult to shoot back, to give them stealth, and then you can improve their output by making them Mark of Nurgle, giving them sustained and lethal hits thanks to a nearby Hellbrute, and potentially rerolls for Abaddon the Despoiler. So essentially, you can put a Defiler out in the middle of nowhere. Your opponent has to come out to try to engage with it. They have to push forward aggressively to shoot it. If they don't, or if they do and don't kill it, it kills them back. And obviously, even if they do kill it, they're probably going to have to commit more points than it's worth. And then they're just going to be able to hit back with the other Defilers and the other shooting units and do ruinous damage back. The benefit of Pact-Bound Zealots is that it has some of the highest damage output potential in the game. However, its ability to apply that damage is very limited. So if he has these really hyper-efficient, big, monstrous profiles like the Defilers, it's going to be able to brawl a little bit more effectively with its opponent. So we've been seeing a lot of builds that take some combination of Defilers, Obliterators, Vindicators, all of these other units that can sort of combo together to construct this powerful gun line, and then you can late game with the really strong characters that Chaos Space Marines have access to. So we're taking Abaddon the Despoiler as well as a Hellbrute with the Mark of Slaanesh to construct the full Abaddon Hellbrute combo. So we're going to use the Hellbrute to give 5+ critical, or excuse me, we're going to use the detachment ability to give 5+ criticals. The Hellbrute can then give critical, lethal, and sustains on 5s, and then Abaddon can reroll all of those to try to get additional ones. And if we are playing high volume weapons on the Defilers, now in this case we are playing Hades las cannons, but also excruciator cannons on their side guns. they're going to be able to essentially fish for tons and tons of conversions with those relatively low strength gunshots. Now, in addition to that, we're also running Huron Blackheart and the Masters of the Maelstrom, in addition to a Traitor Enforcer and Vashtor the Archivane. Vashtor can improve the strength characteristic of those guns, so he can push up all those Defilers to strength 8 on the Excruciator cannons and 14 on their las cannons and Ectoplasma Destructor, so they can push into even higher toughness enemies, even without using their once per game reroll wounds. They're just going to get reroll ones naturally. So the potential damage output, getting 5+ critical, lethal, sustain, full hit rerolls, plus reroll ones, or full rerolls to wound, plus +2 strength, is nuts. It's absolutely ludicrous. These things will start to kill basically any profile in the game in single activations, which is wild. Now, in addition to that, we also have a Cultist Mob for the backline control, a Chaos Rhino. There are 2 units of Chosen in here. Most likely, one of them is dual attaching with Huron Blackheart and the Masters of the Maelstrom. That gives you a really powerful sort of counterpunch skirmish unit that you can use in the midboard. Basically every model in the unit has 3 or 4 wounds. They're able to regenerate themselves with Goria and the Corpse Master, unless you want to generate command points off of them if you're not doing it with Abaddon already. They have a reactive move. They do mortal wounds. Just a huge amount of utility in this one squad, and they fit in the Chaos Rhino. We then have another unit of 5 Chosen, which attaches to Abaddon to give him advance in charge. We have the Hellbrute we mentioned earlier, as well as a pair of Mark of Nurgle Obliterators, who are going to act as essentially a follow-up gun to the Defilers. The Defilers are where we're getting most of this damage out of for the full Hellbrute combo. However, after that, you can Deep Strike in Obliterators, use their indirect fire to either instigate the fight or to close out for the Defilers once they've killed people. The huge benefit, I will say it, I've said it before, I'll say it again, the huge benefit in this detachment is the ability to trade gunshots with other gun lines with the Defilers and use Festering Miasma to make it difficult to shoot them back, which means if your opponent doesn't have the threat range to be able to engage at that really close 18-inch distance, the Defilers can basically just be relatively unmolested for the entire game, which is it's difficult to interact with. And most of the Chaos Space Marine lists that were playing Defilers this weekend were playing some variety of a Pact-Bound Zealot build, using multiple of them, using the full Hellbrute Abaddon combo. It's incredibly strong. Now moving over to OzCon 2026, this was a 48-player event held in Missouri and was won by Emperor's Children. But we also saw Chaos Space Marines as the runners-up, both of these lists using Defilers. You guessed it. I'm so proud of you. You're so smart. In this case, it was a Coterie of the Conceited list being played by Sam Anderson. This ran 2 Winged Demon Princes, one with the Pledge of Unholy Fortune, so he can flip dice into 6s, as well as a pair of Lord Exultants. 3 units of Infractors, so we have 2 for the Lord Exultants to join into, in addition to 1 just skirmishing unit that can trade for objectives. 2 Tormentor Squads, in addition to a pair of Chaos Rhinos. 2 units of Noise Marines to be carried around by those Rhinos. They can fit either the Lord Exultant, the standard Tormentor Squad, or Infractor Squad, in addition to the Noise Marines there that is for delivery. But then we also have 2 Defilers. These guys all running Ectoplasma, Hades Las cannons, and Excruciator cannons. Now, obviously, the big thing for Emperor's Children that they've really never had before is a extremely strong, long-range, dedicated gun platform. Now, I will say that while the Emperor's Children Defiler does have an incredibly strong datasheet ability, it has precision on its melee weapons, in addition to getting +1 to hit against most targets, as long as they're not below half strength. The downside is that it doesn't have the same damage output as some of the other Defiler datasheets. So in sort of the Defiler mirror match, it's a little bit outmatched. However, into most other factions, it allows you to generate your pledge points early in the game without having to commit your units directly into melee, which was a downside of Coterie of the Conceited for all incarnations up until this one. Essentially, every time they wanted to get a pledge point, they would have to dedicate either an 18-inch range Noise Marine squad or a melee squad like a Lord Exultant and an Infractor team. And now they could just do it from 36 inches away by shooting Excruciator cannons with you. And that makes the Coterie of the Conceited build so much more consistent, because instead of just basically playing a trading game where the units you're trading are going to be slightly less effective in the early game, you can now play a game where you just sort of passively generate pledge points off of your opponent's lighter units, you don't have to commit any of your own resources wholesale. You can just rely on the effectively 2+ ballistic skill Defilers to do that. And then late game, you come in and you have your full army, all your Noise Marines, all your Infractors, and they're at full power, which is enormous. So huge paradigm shift for Emperor's Children. It's no surprise to me that every single Emperor's Children list, unlike the other Chaos Space Marine lists that we're talking about in this section, every single Emperor's Children list played Defilers because it's something that's brand new for the faction. Absolutely huge transformation to this army. Now with that, we're hopping over to the Southwest Swordwind GT. This was a 28-player event and went to 2 undefeated. That included Timothy Kemp, who took second place, running Thousand Suns. And this is a Thousand Suns build that's been getting more and more popular as the popularity of the Defiler datasheets improves, and that is a Warp-Forged Cabal. This includes a Sorcerer with Warp Cursed Rune Master, which gives him plus 6 inches of range as long as he is within 6 inches of a friendly vehicle. We then have 4 units of Rubric Marines. These guys have a couple different utilities inside the army. First of all, they're high OC and close combat anti-infantry units, which is helpful. So they're good at, essentially skirmishing with other units, especially if you're using Temporal Surge. You can clear out opposing infantry, but also importantly, they have Aspiring Sorcerers. So if you have any effects that require psychic attacks, so they give you access to an additional Sorcerer, which you can use for Kabbalistic Rituals, as well as to buff your unit's detachment ability, which improves their rerolls if you do have a Psyker nearby, which is helpful. Now, in addition to that, we do have a Chaos Rhino to carry those things around the table, on top of a trio of Defilers. Now, the Defilers had slightly different builds. 2 of them were playing Electro Scourges, which is the extra attack melee profile that the unit has access to. So that gives them a little bit more use of those rerolls from the detachment because they want to be getting into melee, so they get it both in shooting and melee potentially. I think there is a downside for these lists of getting sort of overwhelmed in melee, and having the extra attack profile for those Defilers is helpful. Now, on top of that, one of them is running a pair of Hades Las Cannons, and the other 2 are running a single set of Hades Las Cannons, which gives them 2 attacks rather than the normal 4 you would expect. But given the fact that we have floating rerolls, hit, wound, and damage on those Defilers, the 2 versus 4 Hades Las Cannons probably isn't that big of a difference, because almost 100% of the time you're going to have at least one of the dice rolls somewhere along the track utilize those rerolls. So the chance of converting 2 with a reroll floating for each step of the attack sequence is extremely high. Whereas 4, there's a pretty solid chance that you will miss with multiple or fail to wound with multiple attacks, and that will overload your ability to reroll through and actually get those. So having the Electro Scourge to shore up your melee certainly helps. It makes a lot of sense in that case. Now, on top of that, we have a single Forge Fiend to apply some suppression to people in addition to a Mauler Fiend. We have a Mutalith Vortex Beast, which I think is an interesting inclusion. They actually don't benefit from your detachment's abilities at all because they're monsters and not vehicles. However, they allow your Kabbalistic Rituals to go farther, which is definitely helpful for a detachment that doesn't have any effects like Grand Coven does to reroll your Kabbalistic Rituals. You don't have Magnus in the list, so you do need a little bit of consistency on your ritual casting. The other thing is that the Mutalith Vortex Beast is a very similar defensive profile to the Defilers, which means that this army is pushing a pretty hard skew, right? You have essentially 4 very similar defensive profile big heavy units that your opponent has to deal with. There's also the 2 lighter vehicles, the Forge Fiend and the Mauler Fiend, as well as a Rhino and some Sekitar robot squads, but the core of the list is all this T11 5+ invuln save high wound count unit. Now, on top of that, we have 2 units of 2 Sekitar robots for a bit of additional utility, and that is the entirety of the list, really putting a lot on the back of those Defilers. With that, we're going to move on over to the GT Leon Iberian Open. This was a 44-player event being held in Spain, and we're going to talk about both the first and second placing lists. Now, we're actually going to start with the second place placer, this being Juan Lopez, who was playing Necrons. And Necrons also had another undefeated at the Prestige Wargaming GT3. That was with a relatively standard Starshatter arsenal. However, Juan Lopez here was playing Hypercrypt Legion, which is pretty cool. It's been a little while since we've seen Hypercrypt Legion in play. However, the ability to deep strike monsters, or at least Deep Strike Catan Shards, is kind of a big deal. So it allows you to pick up those units, place them in strategic reserve, and then hold them and rapid ingress them for future use. You can also reposition your Catan Shards around the table a little bit more freely without having to worry about strategic reserve restrictions for them. Now, in this case, we're running a Catan Shard of the Deceiver, Nightbringer, and Void Dragon, in addition to 2 standard Transcendent Catan. We are almost back to the OG 6 Catan Shard list that we saw at the very beginning of the edition with the launch of the Necron Codex. We also have a Hexmark Destroyer with Dimensional Overseer, so we can pick up an additional one of those guys every round. We then have a bunch of utility in the form of a Deathmark unit, as well as 2 Flayed One units, a lot of deep striking and reserving infantry, plus 2 Locust Destroyers for some backline support as well. And that's it. It is mostly the skew of 5 Catan Shard profiles running up the table, being backed up by Hypercrypt maneuverability and very efficient Necron utility units. Now, moving on, let's talk about the winner of this event, which was Ulltramarines, the first of our Space Marine factions to go undefeated. And this was Eduardo Garcia Fernandez, who went undefeated with a Ceramite Sentinel list. Now, this is the new Space Marine detachment that gives you benefits for being within terrain features. It's kind of a cool detachment ability. It gives you reroll 1s to hit and wound if you're within a terrain feature, and you improve your stratagems by gaining the Entrenched keyword by being within a terrain feature and not setting up on the battlefield or moving very quickly that turn. Now, in this build, we were running Rabute Gilliman in addition to Uriel Ventress, a Desolation Squad, which is going to be getting those benefits pretty consistently by just standing still, benefiting from heavy and firing their indirect fire weapons to get the effects of those reroll ones to hit and wound. We then have 2 Incursor Squads, an Infiltrator Squad, 3 Invader ATVs, in addition to a pair of Repulsor Executioners, a pair of Scout Squads, a Wardens of Ultramar unit, and a Victrix Honor Guard squad. Now, the composition of the army is relatively standard. It's Repulsor Executioners with Ultramarine good stuff for the most part. However, the benefit is, of course, the combination of this really nice, just sort of dice curve smoothing effect where about 50% or more of your attacks are going to be benefiting from reroll ones to hit and wound, which means you don't necessarily need to have Oath of Moment on every single target. One downside that Ultramarines can sometimes have is the simple, potential to get threat overloaded, where your opponent has too many things for you to be able to efficiently kill because you're not quite able to get Oath of Moment on enough stuff, and your weapon profiles without Oath of Moment are kind of mediocre. But this, given the fact that all you need to do is be within a terrain feature, getting you rerolls is incredibly strong, and being inside terrain features is very easy in 10th edition Warhammer 40k. In addition to that, we also have some units. For example, Uriel Ventress allowing your units to deep strike using rapid ingress, then move up the table in order to gain the Entrenched keyword if they move a small distance. You can also use the Desolation Squad to gain the Entrenched keyword, for example, and that can be used alongside stratagems like Augmented Targeting, which gives you sustain and lethal hits if you are entrenched. So if we're talking about a Desolation Squad shooting 5 D3 Castellan launchers plus a Vanguard launcher shot, getting sustain plus lethal, targeting your Oath of Moment target, and +1 to wound is incredibly effective. +1 to wound plus reroll 1s, because you're going to be in a terrain feature, probably in a ruin, while you're making those attacks. You also have access to 2 CP reroll wounds against character, monsters, vehicles. There is a lot of benefit to be gained from these stratagems overlapping. Now, whether or not it's as good as the flexibility you gain from something like Gladius Task Force or Blade of Ultramar is an open question, but it definitely stands to reason that this is just so powerful of an effect. I mean, reroll 1s to hit and wound is an effect that made the entire Angelic Inheritors detachment for Blood Angels, for example, a detachment that did not have the same level of flexibility as something like a Liberator Assault Group, which has higher potential damage, advance and charge, all that stuff. However, just gaining reroll 1s in a lot of cases means that your dice consistency is so good, you might just be fine. And that's essentially what this Ceramite Sentinels build is doing. Being able to be firing these Repulsor Executioner shots and just benefiting from hitting on 2s thanks to Incursors, reroll 1s thanks to the detachment ability, reroll 1s to wound, potentially a +1 to wound in there as well, is just crazy good. You can also, consider the fact that things like Wardens of Ultramar and Victrix Honor Guard with 2+ weapon skill charging into an enemy that's in a terrain feature. All you have to do is touch the terrain feature with 1 model in your unit, and all of those 2+ weapon skill models hit on 2s, rerolling 1s. It's just hyper consistent, and it's cool to see non-Blade of Ultramar lists using new detachments that whose consistency can allow them to compete with the more standard Ultramarine builds. Now, speaking of standard builds, we're also going to move back to the Fantasia Fanatic. Talk about the third place placer. This was Patrick Reith, who went undefeated 5-0. Lost out a little bit on tiebreakers, but otherwise won all of his games using a Deathwatch Black Spirit Task Force. And you've probably seen this list before. It has a Watchmaster with Tome of the Custodes, Justiciar with Beacon Angelus, a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, a Gravis Armored Captain with Thief of Secrets. We've got a big Deathwatch Veteran unit for the Justiciar to hop into with a bunch of melee weapons. We have an Intercessor Squad for the backline, a Jump Pack Assault Intercessor Squad for some utility, in addition to a trio of Fortis kill teams. One of those gets the Watchmaster, 2 Incursor Squads, and 2 Indomitor kill teams. One of those gets the Gravis Armored Captain. It's tried and true, and it works well. So I'm sure we'll be seeing this Deathwatch list performing into the future, just like we see it here. Moving on from that, we're going to go on over to the Squig City Casino Royale. This was a 90-player event being held in Pendleton, Oregon, and was won by Chaos Space Marines. Chaos Space Marines took first and second place using Defilers, but third place was Adeptus Custodes. This is Hunter Seams, who was running Talons of the Emperor in a relatively standard build. It was running a pair of Venerable Land Raiders, but we also saw a Caladius Grav Tank as well. Now, the core of the list was 6 units of Custodian Guard, the maximum number you can take. It was 1 unit of 5, which I assume attaches to Inquisitor Kyria Draxus, but we also have 5 units of 4 to skirmish around those Land Raiders. So 2 Land Raiders in order to deliver 2 units of those, and you can cycle units in and out, use reactive moves to put them back into the transports after your opponent comes to fight them. But we also then have a little bit more damage output coming out of this particular build because we are running a Caladius Grav Tank as well. Now, on top of that is a Witchseeker Squad and a pair of Prosecutor units, in addition to a Calidus Assassin for utility. Plus, we have that Inquisitor Draxus, who's going to hop into one of the Custodian Guard units, most likely the larger unit, to make more use of the double tap that you end up sometimes helpful +1 to hit that Kyria can give you when they're lining up for powerful range sort of alpha strikes, using her lone operative ability plus her shooting and then double tapping it with Sentinel Storm once per game on top of that. So a relatively standard build from Custodes, but one that we have been seeing used more and more recently, where it does push more towards the heavy anti-tank of the Caladius Grav Tank rather than going all in on the survivability of Land Raiders and just using purely the Land Raider profile. Benefit of the Caladius is that it doesn't really need to forward deploy quite as much as the Land Raiders do, and it's a little bit smaller than Land Raiders, so it's a little bit easier to hide in addition to doing more anti-tank damage. Now that moves us to the largest event of the weekend, the 284-player Super Major Warhammer Open Maastricht in the Netherlands. This was won by Ron Eliyahu, who won it with a Tyranid Subterranean Assault. Tyranids, it turns out, still doing stuff, so good for them. In this case, we were running a hyper-adapted Ravener squad, a Nero Tyrant, in addition to a Trigon Prime, Old One-Eye. There is a single Carnifex for Old One-Eye to jump into to give rerolls to, which is helpful. And this is a new piece of pretty interesting Tyranid technology that I'm here for. 3 Tyranid Prime Lash Whips. Now, it is rare, I think, that these Tyranid Primes end up attaching into units. There are Hormigons available that they could attach into, but one thing that we have been using them for most recently in a lot of Tyranid builds is simply as trading pieces. They've basically finally made a Tyranid unit that deals an appreciable amount of damage for its points cost. And in this case, the Tyranid Prime with Lash Whip comes in at 65 points. It has a total of between 12 and 14 melee attacks, depending on the profile that you're swinging into. They give themselves sustained hits 1 because their ability does not require that they lead a unit. It's only that they just give it all the time, and they're hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s. So you have potentially up to 14 melee attacks that are super high consistency. You should convert somewhere around 14 to 16 of them on average at a relatively decent strength characteristic between strength 5 and strength 9 because they are a synapse creature themselves. So they're able to go into a wide variety of profiles, and especially like enemy utility units, and for only 65 points, they can most likely kill them. Now, the downside, of course, is that they are characters, so they give up things like assassination, but you don't have to put them in danger until they're ready to fight because you are playing Subterranean Assault. You can put a Hyper Adapted, or a Ravener squad, I should say, behind a building, create a tunnel, drop in the Tyranid Prime out of the tunnel, charge into 5 Space Marines on an objective, clear the objective, and call it a day. And these little guys at their new points value are great at doing that. It turns out that massively decreasing the points value of a unit and increasing its damage output significantly is a really good way to make a unit good. Who would have thought? But if you had told me 2 months ago that Last Whip Tyranid Primes would be winning super majors, I would have kicked you in your shins and then laughed at you for being stupid. But in this case, I'm the stupid one because it turns out the massive buffs that they give this data sheet actually make it pretty strong. Now, as I mentioned before, there are 2 Hormigaunt units. There is a Biovore, 1 Carnifex, excuse me. He is also a Carnivore, I imagine. I don't think there's many Herbivores among the Tyranid roster, but in this case, he is running a pair of Crushing Claws in addition to a Venom Cannon, plus his Bioplasma and Spine Banks. He attaches to Old One-Eye, so that Old One-Eye benefits from his leadership ability. We have a Lictor, 1 Maleceptor, a Neurolictor for some utility, 2 units of Raveners to generate your tunnel markers, in addition to 1 Rupture Cannon Tyrannifex for anti-armor, and a Zoanthrope unit to attach in with the Neurotyrant. So we do have a couple of real heavy hitters. Old One-Eye hits like a truck, especially when he's got his regular Carnifex to attach into. The Hyper-Adapted Raveners hit pretty hard. The Zoanthropes and the Tyrannifex hit pretty hard. And your opponent is going to screen those out by throwing out little 10-man or 5-man infantry squads, which you're going to kill with your very efficient Last Whip Tyranid Primes. Love it. What an interesting combination. And I've seen several games using all these Tyranid Primes, and they tend to perform very well in all of them, which is awesome. Now, heading on over to the Derg Doom 6. This is a 46-player event being held in Ireland and was won by Connor Crowley playing Tau Empire. He was playing a Montclaw detachment, but we did see a couple of interesting innovations in here. One of them being a Kroot Warshaper. This guy rocking the Strike Swiftly enhancement. That enhancement tends to be really strong but difficult to place on a unit because it does require that you start on the battlefield. So a lot of things, deep striking or starting in transports, it's not a really good place to put it. However, the Kroot Warshaper is a really interesting piece of technology inside this detachment because it gives you use of focus fire for free. You can use it targeting the Kroot Warshaper's unit and then also another Tau Empire unit, and they get +1 AP when targeting an enemy. But the Warshaper doesn't actually have to see them. So he can just be in the corner, screening out your backline or holding an objective and be providing that bonus as long as he doesn't shoot anything besides the target of the focus fire effect, which is pretty easy to do. So he's just a passive source of +1 AP in a lot of cases, which is awesome. He can also join into your Kroot Carnivore unit to buff them up a little bit, and he hits, I don't want to say hard, but better than a Tau unit in melee. He has like a cool anti-infantry gun as well. It's a nice inclusion. From there, we also have a Kandra Fireblade in addition to 2 Breacher teams, one of which is going to be attached to that Fireblade. We have a Devilfish to carry them around, in addition to a Ghost Keel battlesuit, a railgun equipped Hammerhead gunship, a pair of Riptide battlesuits, in addition to 1 Skyray and 1 Piranha, the Twin Lance to do Twin Lance stuff, 2 units of stealth battlesuits for spotting, in addition to 2 Pathfinder teams, and 1 unit of Vespid Stingwings. Altogether, relatively standard. It is interesting that we are cutting Riptides out of the list very slowly but surely. This one down to only 2 Riptides rather than the typical 3, but we are running those additional Breacher teams, so we have more trading units in the mid-game, which can shore up a problem that Montclaw has with its ability to hold territory without giving up its lighter infantry. The Breacher teams are a little bit tougher to kill because they come equipped with Guardian drones, which can make them kind of difficult to peel off of objectives if you don't have the right tools for it. And then we also have some additional gunships as well. Now, sticking with Xenos for the rest of the video here, we're going to head on over to Double Decker Decimation, which was won by Cody Giroux, the Drukhari Extraordinaire. This was a 32-player event being held in Cheney, Kansas. Now, in this case, Cody was playing a Spectacle of Spite detachment with a bunch of good Spectacle of Spite stuff. That included a trio of Succubi, one with Periaptive Torments, one with Morgana's Curse, and one with Chronoshard, in addition to Lady Malice and Lelith Hesperax. Those are going to attach into a combination of 4 Witch units. So we have attachments for Lilith and the 4 Succubi. 2 Venoms are going to split those into 4 units of 5 in addition to 2 units of 10, and we can deliver one of them with a Raider. We also then have a Chronos for Pain Token Regeneration, 2 units of 10 Hellions, in addition to a unit of 5 for some serious damage output when we are combining that alongside combat drugs. We have a pair of Mandrake units, as well as some heavy weapon damage from a team of heavy weapon Scourges, that being 4 Dark Lances in each unit. So 12 total Dark Lances, plus the 1 off of the Raider. What's interesting here is that we've totally eschewed any bikers. There are no Reavers, jet bikes, in this list at all. Instead, we're taking all that fast infantry. We can use the reactive charge from the infantry to hold territory in the middle, and then counterattack with all the Hellions to deal some serious damage. And with that, we are going to move on over to the Southwest Swordwind GT and its eventual winner, Jake Dinner, who was running an Ork Green Tide. And this was a true Green Tide. None of this weedy git stuff where you're only taking a couple of Ork Boys units. This one is taking the full 120 Ork Boys in 6 units of 20. You'll love to see it. We also have the classic 3 Pain Boys to give Field Up Pains and regeneration to those Ork units, in addition to Gazgo Thranka to attach to one of those as well. Boss Snickrot for some utility. 2 of those, are going to get delivered by Battle Wagons, so we can start them on the line without fear of being absolutely obliterated by incoming shooting. The Battle Wagons can take some hits for that and also act as threat extension as the game goes on. We then have a Gretchen unit for the back line and a Storm Boys unit. Very simple list, but obviously incredibly good at taking and holding territory with just an insane number of Ork Boys bodies. Classic stuff. And with that, those are all the best armies of Warhammer 40k for this week. Kind of in some insane builds this week. I like to see it. Obviously, I think the Defiler thing is kind of wild, but we also saw those Ceramite Sentinels and Tyranids doing well, which is always cool. Big thanks to Frontline Gaming for sponsoring this episode of the series, and thanks to everybody who supports the channel either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you so much. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.